Trump facing off against Modi, Xi, and Putin simultaneously. And for all of those leaders, all of those strongmen, no matter how kind of powerful their position is in their own country, they are dealing with someone who is fundamentally unbelievably unpredictable. He could put 100% tariffs on for one day, for 24 hours. He could take him off 24 hours later.
We now know that the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to visit Moscow Wednesday or Thursday, we're hearing. Donald Trump's latest deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire deal expires on Friday. Here is the US president's response to a question about what'll happen if Russia has not agreed to a ceasefire by then.
There'll be sanctions, but they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. They're wily characters, and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions. So we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on the border in terms of, we're talking about with Gaza, getting people fed. And he may be going, I think next week, Wednesday or Thursday, may be going to Russia. They would like to see him. They've asked that he meet, so we'll see what happens.
OK, so that's a request. That's interesting from Donald Trump. Russia have asked to meet Steve Witkoff. I wonder whether that's being interpreted as a kind of gilding the lily, sort of, satisfying Donald Trump that they're trying to have conversations that they actually aren't that interested in having. In other words, this is all about the optics, George. How's it being interpreted?
I think Trump is ratcheting up the pressure in a couple of ways. So firstly, you had him announcing the deployment of 2 nuclear submarines, and he deliberately left it vague whether or not those were armed with ballistic missiles carrying nuclear weapons, or if they were nuclear powered. That may seem like a kind of a niche difference, but it's quite important. It's basically whether or not it's carrying nuclear weapons, or it's an attack submarine. And so he kind of made this ambiguous statement that was vaguely threatening. So that was one way of increasing the pressure on Putin ahead of this deadline. The other way is that he's really squeezing India. So the threat is not to target Russia itself, it's to target countries that do business with Russia. So that's primarily China and India, because they continue to buy a huge amount of Russian oil. And last week, Trump put 25% tariffs on India, which he specifically tied to the fact that they were kind of economically dependent on this Russian oil, and that they would remain deeply embedded with the Russian economy. Now, today, he said that he's going to substantially increase tariffs on India even further. So he's really kind of, there are 2 prongs to this. He's kind of raised the stakes with the kind of nuclear rhetoric on the one hand, and on the other hand, he's really kind of pushing on India in particular, not yet China, interestingly, but India as a weak point where he thinks that he can, put some pressure on Putin. Yeah,
look, he did reference last week, didn't he, the friendship that the US enjoys with India. So, it is purely about what India is doing in terms of buying large amounts of energy from Russia, that he's inflicting those tariffs. So that's what's going on there. If this deadline on Friday, so if Vladimir Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire by Friday, Trump said that he'll impose secondary sanctions of 100% tariffs against Moscow's remaining trade partners. So that's an indication of where it might go with India and with China. Again, the $64 million question is whether this is going to have much effect. What is prospected from Steve Witkoff's visit to Russia? We don't know who he's going to meet yet. Does Vladimir Putin feel like, do we feel like we're any closer to achieving anything like a ceasefire, George? It feels pretty impossible at the moment.
If he followed through, it would have an absolutely huge effect, because putting 100% tariffs on India and China would force them to make a decision. Either they continue selling goods to the US, the world's largest economy, or they buy their oil from Russia. And I think, that would leave them in a very difficult position. But that's a massive if. And the problem for all these countries, you've basically got Trump facing off against Modi, Xi, and Putin simultaneously. And for all of those leaders, all of those strongmen, no matter how kind of powerful their position is in their own country, they are dealing with someone who is fundamentally unbelievably unpredictable. He could put 100% tariffs on for one day, for 24 hours. He could take him off 24 hours later. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. We saw the tariffs on China at one stage go up to 145% earlier this year. If he deems it, he is determined to go down in history as a peacemaker. And if this week or, for a couple of days, he decides that's exactly, his priority right now, then maybe he'll go and do something, as bold as that. But then again, maybe he won't. And this is the calculation that's being played out, in Moscow, in New Delhi, in Beijing.
There is a wide encouragement for Donald Trump to be stronger on Russia. And some of the evidence for this is this social media spat between him and Dmitry Medvedev, who's the former Russian president. He's now a national security official in Russia. And you referenced this earlier. Medvedev said that Trump's deadline and sanctions threat were a step towards war. He'd warned that it basically risked sparking a war between Russia and the United States. And that was when Donald Trump decided to move his subs in. But as you said, carefully didn't say whether they had nuclear capability or not. And it was interesting because Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky's chief of staff, noted today that Medvedev had not made any public statements since Trump's submarine move. So that kind of evidence is being collected as well, that actually strength works against Vladimir Putin, and, certainly applying tariffs like that to his trading partners could be a good demonstration of that. Let's move on to, more than a dozen House Democrats. They've signed a letter urging the Trump administration to recognise a Palestinian state, and at least one plans to introduce a pro-statehood resolution. That's according to the American news website Axios. The letter reads, "This tragic moment has highlighted for the world the long overdue need to recognise Palestinian self-determination." Donald Trump was asked yesterday whether the situation in Gaza amounts to a genocide. Here was his response.
I don't think it's sad. Look, they're in a war. Some horrible things happened on October 7th, as you know. It was a horrible, horrible thing. One of the worst I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of bad things since some president. And I've seen some bad things, but that October 7th was with Hamas was really, really bad.
Yeah, look, we heard from Donald Trump last week, didn't we, that he was concerned about the levels of starvation in Gaza. We also know that he didn't discuss the recognition of Palestinian statehood with Keir Starmer. It's something that he is broadly against. Will this letter make any difference, George?
In short, no. I think, it's a pretty niche issue as it's regarded in DC. Those voices that are pro-Palestinian and are calling for recognition are pretty few and far between. I think there is an interesting division that's opening up in the MAGA world, and you have people who are outside the tent but would see themselves as kind of broadly aligned with the movement. So people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are increasingly critical of Israel.
Well, she called it a genocide, didn't she, Marjorie Taylor Greene? Yeah.
She did. But crucially, she is not in the administration. So I don't think you'll see anyone in the administration use that language. And they have been a lot more cautious around this. I mean, they regard what the UK and France and Canada is doing as basically unhelpful as far as they're concerned. But they're not going to go out on a limb and kind of cause Starmer pain over it. I mean, even Trump's slapdown was pretty tepid. So it's not an issue that really bothers them, what European countries and Canada do.
All right, let's talk about Sydney Sweeney, who many of our listeners wouldn't have heard of maybe until earlier today or late yesterday if they were listening to Times Radio. She's an actress. She's featured in a couple of things, The White Lotus, some of our listeners might have seen, but she's creating headlines because Donald Trump has weighed in on her controversial jeans ad for American Eagle. Posted on Truth Social that Sydney Sweeney, a registered Republican, has the hottest ad out there, and go get 'em, Sydney. The ad received backlash as being tone deaf and a tagline that reads, "Sydney Sweeney has great genes." Here's Donald Trump's reaction to hearing that the Euphoria and Anyone But You actress is a registered member of the Republican Party.
She's a registered Republican? Oh, now I love her ad. Is that right? Is Sydney Sweeney? You'd be surprised at how many people are Republicans. That's what I wouldn't have known, but I'm glad you told me that. If Sydney Sweeney is a registered Republican, I think her ad is fantastic.
What does America make of Sydney Sweeney being a registered Republican? Obviously, Donald Trump's delighted. But I wonder if, in that world, traditionally, actors and actresses tend to be quite liberal. They tend, and I'm generalising massively here, but they tend to be more Democrat-leaning.
I think it's a little bit of a storm in a teacup here, and that the Republicans have successfully kind of built up a straw man to take down. So basically, the implication is that because they do a pun on genes, that Sydney Sweeney, who is she has blonde hair and blue eyes and kind of has the kind of what would conform to conventional beauty standards. The idea of her talking about great genes and it being a pun on genes is somehow kind of eugenicist. And that this is how Republicans have effectively caricatured liberal criticism of this ad. To be honest, I don't think I've seen any Democrats, make a convincing argument to that. It seems like a few comments on social media. Anyway, it's quite a useful way to kind of pigeonhole your Democrat rivals. So they've basically accused them of saying that Sydney Sweeney needs to be cancelled for doing this advert. And it's got to the stage now where we had this bizarre True Social from Trump earlier where he was talking about how Sydney Sweeney is hot and Taylor Swift is not because she endorsed Kamala Harris at the last election. So
yes,
we're deep into Trump world now.
Yeah, culture wars. He called Taylor Swift a woke singer. America's biggest pop star. He, of course, clashed with her before. Ever since I alerted the world as to what she was saying on Truth Social, that I can't stand her. Hate, he says. She was booed out of the Super Bowl and became no longer hot. The tide has seriously turned. Being woke is for losers. Being Republican is what you want to be. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The podcaster Megyn Kelly's got involved. You'll all be delighted to know. She's claimed that this advert for American Eagle is a turning point in the presentation of beauty. She said, we've been suffering with the elevation of homely people in our fashion ads and our fitness ads for years now, and we're over it. We miss attractive people. We're sick of trying to pretend that these objectively unattractive people are the new beauty standard. They are not. I mean, they're dining out on this one, George.
Yeah, they are. And it also helps that they get to include a picture of Sydney Sweeney every time the story comes around.
The Times is also guilty, by the way. There is a picture of, if anyone's wondering what she looks like in her pair of jeans, you can make up your own mind by heading to thetimes.com, so you can. George, great to hear from you. Thank you. George Grylls, The Times' Washington correspondent. Good to have you with us.